We had a question come in earlier today, and I was looking to dodge this. I had spoken my piece on this entire Jalen Carter, Georgia situation. Is he going to fall in the draft? Should we even be talking about it in that context when 2 lives were lost? And you know the backstory there. But I can't escape it because Alan sent a question in today that really echoes what several of you have sent to me over the past week or so. So I'm going to do it right here on this Thursday evening. Alan, if you're listening on podcast, you can't see the question on the screen. Alan asked me, why are you ignoring Kirby's culture issues at Georgia when even the AJC has called him out? Well, I'll tell you, Alan, I didn't really think much of the AJC piece. So that's why I didn't talk about the AJC piece. And don't bother going to look. It's behind a paywall. So we're not going to really read a lot from the AJC piece. But here's the summary. Georgia's got culture issues. That was the summary of the AJC piece. And then they talked about player arrests and the street racing issue that they have up there, neither of which I'm dismissing, neither of which I'm overlooking. But there's a reason I try to stay away from this, and it's the same reason I stay away from questioning play calling. I don't know enough about it. And here's the difference between me and the person who penned that article. I'm willing to admit it. And that person is not, because there's a lot of money to be made and a lot of traffic to be had this time of year in calling out someone's culture. The play calling thing is pretty straightforward. Most people just couldn't beat their way out of a wet paper bag when it comes to diagramming a football play. Therefore, that's why I don't think they're qualified to question play calling. Not to mention you haven't even begun to know as much as those coaching staffs have forgotten about the intricacies of said venture, as well as the personnel within the organization. But forget about play calling, because we're talking about culture here and someone questioning your culture. What's culture? How do you know when you have a culture problem? And how do you know when someone else has a culture problem? Here's why I dismiss this stuff a lot of times. It could be true that someone has a culture issue. It's just that I don't really value the opinion of people who have never built anything when it comes to diagnosing someone else's cultural issues. And to be clear, when we're talking about building a major college football program and then maintaining it at an extremely high level, which Kirby Smart and Georgia are at right now, you're talking about obviously building a very high-profile organization. You're talking about leading people, and not just leading people, but getting them to buy into something that you have injected into an organization bigger than yourself in terms of philosophy, in terms of values, in terms of principle, and understanding therein how complex that organization is to run. That's culture. You know, that's how you install one. That's how you instill one. And most people have never done that. Most people have never run an organization. The few are called to do that because there are very few that are qualified to do it. So they got one at Georgia. Everyone's got one. Some people's cultures are great. Many more of them suck, but everyone's got a culture. So at Georgia, not only have I thought they don't have a culture issue, I think they got one of the strongest cultures in college football. And you see, long before any of these incidents that happened after this past season happened, long before anyone wrote an article about questionable culture issues at Georgia, people talked about this behind the scenes. It's not a mystery that kids occasionally get in trouble at Georgia, at Bama, at Florida, at Minnesota, and everywhere in between. How do you know when it bleeds over from some people doing some stupid stuff to you having a full-blown culture issue? Well, the answer is unless you get a peek behind the curtain, you probably don't know. Now, at some point, if you're getting an arrest every other day, yes, at that point, a blind monkey can assignate that we probably got a culture issue over here, but that's not normally the way it works. Georgia's had some kids do some stupid stuff lately. That much we can all agree on. What I would suggest to you is there is a sizable difference between kids doing some stupid stuff and you having a full-blown culture issue. Meemaw used to always tell me, you know, if you look at culture, good cultures can have bad days. Bad cultures rarely have good weeks. They even more rarely have good months. They've had a lot of good weeks, a lot of good months, a lot of good years now at Georgia. They've had some bad days, though. And I'm not trying to gloss over, and if you've watched this program or listened to the pod, you know I've taken very seriously the consequences of some of the stupid things that some of the players in the Georgia program have done. That's how consequences work. Sometimes you don't have to suffer them when you do something stupid, and 100% of the people watching this show right now can relate to that, by the way. Sometimes you do. And I wouldn't say 100% of you have had to live that out, but some of you have. Some of you have done some dumb things in the past and had to suffer maximum consequence for it. There is a person, or was a person, and are several people now that are either dealing with direct or indirect consequences in the Georgia program because of something like that happening. Very serious thing. And I can assure you there have been some sleepless nights from folks inside that program up there because of that. But what I don't think is they've got to tear the thing down to the studs and rebuild from scratch because some kids doing some stupid things indicate that we've got internal rot here. Just the culture's no good. The culture's great at Georgia. You just got, like any other program out there, some due diligence to do and some spots to clean up. But I go back to the question, Colin, in fact, I know we're rolling some beautiful B-roll right now. Could you do me a favor? Could you take the question and could you throw it back up on the screen for me for just a second? Because I want to make sure I read this right. So the question from Alan was, why are you ignoring Kirby's culture issues at Georgia? Okay, so I read it right. And the AJC's called him out. So, once the AJC does something, we all have to do something. And that's the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for anyone under 35, by the way. Have you taken time, Alan, to measure Georgia against all 134 other FBS programs out there? How do they measure up? If we're just following publicly recorded and reported stories, how do they measure up? Well, I mean, what is the Georgia to Nevada ratio, for example? I don't think you've done that, if you're honest with yourself. No one's out there really tracking that. It's just called another kind of consequence. It's a consequence of success. They don't really do these kind of stories on you when you're 6-6 because no one cares. They care when you're winning. And they especially care when they understand there's real life tragedy involved here. And again, I've been very careful to walk a tightrope in talking about this because I have maintained, and still maintain, it feels really gross talking about something as inconsequential as a newspaper article about possible culture issues within a program when the entire backdrop is loss of life. We don't really have to deal with that much on this show. Normally we're talking about which guy's going to start at right guard for Georgia. We're not talking about whether we should diagnose Georgia as having a culture issue in a situation that stems from people losing their life. But that's where we are right now. That's why it's delicate. But I go back to the question, compared to who? Well, what's the barometer out there? If we got 100% of teams in the hopper route here, how much worse is Georgia than 80% of them, 70% of them, 90% of them? I don't really think that's been done, nor will it be done. That would take a little bit of legwork, and it would also take something you can't acquire, nor can I. And that is intimate familiarity with the inside of a college football program. You would find very quickly they don't put robots on the field. They put 18 to 22-year-old people on the field. You and I were there at one point. They're there right now. Little bit more bright, white, hot spotlight on them than there probably was on you or I when we were that age. And sometimes they do stupid things. And sometimes really bad results come from doing stupid things. Georgia is a great program with, I think, a very solid culture that's had bad days. It's not a bad culture because no bad cultures have great weeks, great months, great years, and they've strung a lot of those together lately. I will also tell you this, in texting around with some folks at both the NFL and college football level today, I can't find one that's willing to echo that sentiment. Alan, that you suggested, that the AJC suggested, you don't find people inside football, anonymous or on the record, that say, yeah, Georgia's culture sucks. Now, they're winning a lot, and they're pumping kids into the NFL, but their culture sucks. You'll also find, on a related note, no one really consistently wins and pumps kids into the NFL with terrible culture. They may do it short term, just like a firework can burn for a little while. They don't sustain it. Funny thing about culture, you're competing against too many other programs that have good ones. If yours sucks, you're not staying on top for very long. I don't think they have a culture issue at Georgia. Now, I am perfectly willing to change that vantage point, change that opinion, if overwhelming evidence continues to present itself. I have a sneaking suspicion it won't.
Guys, thanks for watching Late Kick. Make sure to leave a comment. I love interacting with you. But most of all, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep all of this free.